Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Justice Administration, Chapter 5, Police Issues and Practices. In this chapter, we're going to be looking at some hot-button issues in the area of law enforcement, specifically, several of which we hear about on a regular basis today. We're looking at such issues as the proper use of force, which has been, for the last several months in our society, talked about a whole lot, from the case in Ferguson, Missouri, up through Eric Garner in New York, and other cases around the country. There's the use of force issue, and of course there's also some type of a racial or ethnic issue as well that is being talked about. One good source for information on this particular issue might be the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing, which you can simply find online, and I will try to put a copy of that document in our share folder for the class. So we're also going to be looking at police pursuits, issues about police pursuits, recruitment issues, specifically recruiting females and minorities. Look a little bit about some issues with new technologies, whether it be drones, whether it be body cameras. Those types of things are very important today and kind of pressing today. So there's several different issues today. And an additional one, in addition to females coming into law enforcement, how about females as law enforcement executives? We do have several female police chiefs around the country. So some very interesting and important issues going on in law enforcement today. So the first one we want to look at is the use of force. Police officers are the only element of society that's allowed to use force against its citizens, even deadly force. Deadly force meaning something that's going to cause death of someone at the hands of the police. So police certainly have rules and guidelines for the use of force. Those rules and guidelines vary around the country. The state where I come from, New Jersey, the use of force policy is a statewide policy that all police departments have to adhere to, set by the New Jersey State Attorney General in their Attorney General's guidelines, which I will give you a link to access those guidelines if you'd like to review them. Some states like Pennsylvania do not have general overhead state guidelines, and each individual department may have to find their own or create their own. Say the city of Philadelphia has their own guidelines on use of force. So that makes things a little bit hairy, because maybe a Ben Salem officer is allowed to go to one degree where a Philadelphia officer may have different rules. The rules are certainly similar, but the unfortunate part in some states, like I said, some states are very strict and very specific so that everyone in the state follows the same rules, and others are more flexible in that each department has to come up with their own thing. So police officers are allowed to use the amount of force necessary to effect an arrest. This particular topic, how much force is necessary, has also been a topic of a lot of discussion lately in and around the country. One example, what is the use of force necessary to effect an arrest? The young lady who was at the pool party, part of a group of people that weren't supposed to be at the pool, the lady in the bikini, young African-American female, I'm sure you've seen the video, being taken down by the police officer. How much force should we use? If she was told that she was under arrest, she said no. Officer may have tried to do some other means of getting her under control, and maybe she resisted, and he took her down. Now you can see most of that in the video and try to figure that out, and that issue's been discussed quite a bit, in that his emotions were high, he was in a really bad state that day, and maybe overreacted a little bit. But what is the proper use of force? If somebody mouths off to the cop and says they're not going to go, do you strike them? Do you just grab them and take them down? We're going to go through the different levels of force that can be used by officers, so we get a better picture of it in the coming slides. There's what we call a use of force continuum that kind of defines what kind of force officers can use depending upon what is happening at the time. Whether the person is just mouthing off, are they just simply not being compliant, are they actively resisting, are they trying to cause death or injury to the officer. So very important things. Other issues that seem to be coming to the forefront a lot lately, and your book addresses them in a couple of paragraphs, is physical abuse by officers. So if officers are going beyond their appropriate level of force that the law allows or the use of force policy allows, they may be injuring suspects, injuring citizens, and abusing them. How about verbal or psychological abuse? If officers are berating people with words. And certainly legal abuse may be if an officer is charging someone when in fact they did not have the requisite probable cause to charge someone, maybe charge them for a crime they didn't commit. Other issues, the physical, verbal, and even legal might wind up being violations of people's civil rights, which could wind up also being a federal case or a federal violation, which we did address. I believe in our last class we talked a little bit about that. So this figure gives you an example of a use of force continuum. It's located, if you can't see it on here, of course if you're looking in your ebook, the page is probably no bigger or much smaller than this one. But it's on page 119, and basically on the left side it says, what's the suspect doing? What's the person doing? What level of resistance are they providing against the officer? And the right side shows you the levels of control or force that the officer may use to work against the resistance of the suspect. Now, does this mean that the officer has to go through every step of the process? No, the officer doesn't have to go through every single step. They can, before they get to one. If the person, as an example, if the person draws a gun, the officer doesn't have to go with officer presence and verbal direction and hands-on and all those things. The officer can simply draw their gun and tell the person to comply. And if they don't comply with their gun, maybe they have the authority to shoot them. But if you look at the list here, if the person is simply being, psychological intimidation, person's using nonverbal clues, which basically you see the way their hands are moving, their feet are moving. If they're putting their hands up, you want to take them into custody, you're telling them you want to do something, they're putting their hands up in front of you, they're putting their hands up in your face. That's a clue that maybe they're non-compliant. So you have, number one, the officer is there, present, usually in uniform, and that's why it's important to look good in your uniform, stand up straight and tall, make sure everything's in the right place, and that in and of itself can get people to comply when they say, oh, this officer looks like he or she is ready to do their job. And then you follow that up with verbal direction, basically making sure the person understands what it is that you want them to do. When we have cases where someone says, well, I didn't know it was an officer, or I didn't understand what I was supposed to do, that might be the fault of the officer not properly identifying themselves, maybe not being in proper uniform, or if it's a undercover or plainclothes officer, not putting on the raid jacket or raid vest, or not showing their badge or ID so the person can know for sure that it's a police officer and not just somebody else who's trying to rob them. And verbal direction is very important. You have to be clear when you're trying to get people to comply and do things. You have to make sure they understand. And one thing some officers mess up on or don't get is you have to understand that just like we have different learning styles, we have people that understand different things, that maybe you have suspects out there who may not understand the language that you're using or the words that you're using. You got to make sure that you speak to them in simple terms so that they can understand and then comply. The person goes to the next level where they're verbally non-complying, maybe they're mouthing back off at the officer. Again, we're going officer presence, verbal direction, telling the person what you want them to do. And you may, at some point, get and put the hands on them, and that's in the area of passive resistance. People are taking physical actions that don't prevent the officer's attempt to control them. but they're just like somebody who's at a protest and they just don't move. They won't get up. They won't help you to move them. So your officer has to use their hands, what they call soft, empty hand techniques. Things like wrist locks, pressure point control, various things that are not going to be striking someone. They're just going to be like holding on to them, grabbing them, trying to move them. The person uses what they call defensive resistance. What that is a person's physical actions that prevent the officer's control, but not attempting to harm them. So say the officer's coming in to get them, and you're pushing them away, you're blocking. The officer can then continue to use their hands. They may strike you with hands, fists, feet, elbow in response to this offensive resistance. And you're not trying to hurt them, you're just trying to get them to comply, of course. Now, will people get hurt when this happens? Certainly. If you strike them with a baton or use some type of other mechanical force at this point, somebody could get hurt. Active aggression is when someone is physically assaulting the officer. Again, you have all the options that we discussed before, plus you have what we call hard, empty hand techniques. So there's where you're actually going to be striking this person. You also have soft and hard intermediate weapons. Radio arm locks, arm bars, strikes. Could be with a baton. Also in this area, you might use a pepper spray. Some departments will authorize use of pepper spray when a person is either passive or defensive resistance. Atlantic City, when they first came out with pepper spray, they would tell a person they were under arrest. If they were verbally non-compliant, they would get sprayed. Because if the person said, no, I'm not going with you, you knew that you were probably going to wind up putting hands on them. And it's a lot safer to spray someone with pepper spray than it is to try to control them with your hands and get them under control. There actually was a study a few years back that showed the level of injuries to suspects and officers, and it showed that the use of pepper spray caused a great deal less injuries than pretty much any other means of getting these people under control. So we were at active aggression. Again, it's physical assaults on the officer. Person's not only resisting the officer, but they're actually attacking the officer. So maybe they're trying to hurt the officer. So here you get to the point where, yes, you can use those hard techniques, baton strikes, fist strikes, kicks, whatever it takes. Aggravated active aggression is more serious. The person's really, really trying to hurt the officer. And you can get all the way through the hard strikes, but also use of lethal force. Here we're thinking the person's trying to really hurt the officer or kill them. So this is where your firearm comes into play. You could also then strike to the head and other vital areas, which normally you would not do because they are also considered deadly force. So this is just one version. There are other versions by time of class. On Tuesday, I hope to come up with another version I had as part of my baton instructor class, which uses slightly different terms. And also, if we look at New Jersey's Attorney General's policy on use of force, they also use slightly different terms. So we see similar roles and functions within use of force, what they call the use of force continuum, but sometimes we have different terms and the officers have to understand what they are. Unfortunately, most of the citizenry does not understand or comprehend how this works, and if they see an officer striking someone, they don't understand how they got to that point where, well, why is this officer allowed to hit that person? All right, the next piece of very important issue, I should say, the next very important issue that we find in policing is that of vehicular pursuits. Vehicular pursuits, as you may understand, if you've watched some of the police video shows that are on, you've probably seen a pursuit. You may also have seen a pursuit in a real TV news show, California news programs. They have a lot of pursuits in California, so you have a lot of on-air pursuits. We don't have so many here in Jersey or in Pennsylvania, California apparently also has a lot more news helicopters, so they get overhead and they follow the pursuits. It doesn't happen all that often here. But basically, the issue with pursuits is people can get hurt. You have a car traveling at a high rate of speed, and people are going to get hurt. And it could cause some major problems. As I've mentioned in other classes, when I was still a rookie cop working in Mount Laurel, it was shortly after I came to Mount Laurel. I was off duty one day, but I was still active in the ambulance squad and the fire department. So we were dispatched to a traffic accident, a crash. And I didn't know at the time what it was all about. All I knew was I was going to a crash. And there were injuries, because that was, my volunteer position was dealing with injured people as a EMT. So I go to this crash, and when we find out, when we get there, is it was actually a vehicle pursuit. Gentleman had an encounter with the New Jersey State Police because he tried to basically carjack someone, which was long before carjacking was actually a law. Would have been a robbery, but he tried to do that. Encountered the New Jersey State Police because he didn't get the people's car. Troopers are talking to him and probably about to arrest him, and he runs, jumps in a parked patrol car, which unfortunately the keys were in it, the engine's running, and he takes off. Troopers get another troop car, and they go and chase him down. It's from all the way out in Pemberton, New Jersey, all through a whole bunch of little towns, all the way through to Mount Laurel, where some of my guys got involved, and entered Morristown, where the vehicle struck a car that had 6 people recently moved into New Jersey who were, I believe, on their way to church, and caused that car to burst into flames. And all those people died in that pursuit. All those people died. The suspect, who was injured and wound up going to the hospital, was not injured, or I should say did not die. He survived. He survived so he could spend time in prison later for six deaths as a result of his crimes. So vehicle pursuits can be very dangerous. You got somebody who wants to get away from the police, driving at a high rate of speed. Maybe the car is not in the greatest shape. Maybe the driver's not that great. So definitely a concern for police management. We have a lot of civil liability that arises from some pursuits. If people get injured and the police were chasing this person, people want to know why. Why were the police chasing them? Were they justified? Was it really that important to chase this person and cause people to get hurt? So around the country, there are pursuit policies. The International Association of Chiefs of Police has a model pursuit policy that any agency can take and create, make it into their own. New Jersey, just like in the use of force policy mentioned earlier, there is a pursuit policy as well that every agency within the state of New Jersey has to follow, from the New Jersey State Police on down to the smallest local police department. We all have to follow that pursuit policy, and we're trained in it. Every year we have to go through training. Other places, as just like use of force, other places don't necessarily have statewide policies. Again, the state of Pennsylvania, the policies are more on the local level. Big cities like Philadelphia are going to make their own policy. Other smaller towns have to make their own policies. There's no statewide. I even found out from our local chief here in Middletown that he moved up from Philadelphia and came into Middletown, and there were certain things that they didn't have policies for, that he actually had to create them. And in other states, they might be statewide policies. So when we conduct pursuits, there is a delicate balance that takes place when we conduct pursuits. We have to balance crime control and catching the bad guy versus community safety. So policies are going to look at that and put controls in place so that officers, let's say as an example, aren't chasing a car for a motor vehicle violation that's not really that serious, and maybe we can catch the guy later. They're not chasing that guy all through a bunch of towns, going through a lot of intersections at high rate of speed, and maybe even winding up in a town where there's a community fair where the road's closed and this guy barrels right into it. That's like the ultimate bad situation for a pursuit. But certainly, all along the way, there's all these intersections where if the person's blowing through traffic lights, people could die, just like that situation that I was at way back in 1986, I believe it was. So, pursuit policies help us to catch the bad guy while not putting the public at great risk. And there are a great number of ways that can be used in some communities to control pursuit, like boxing in. You may have seen this in some TV shows. You put the police cars around them and block them in so we can't go anywhere. Immobilization, precision immobilization. Maybe you're using a device. There are technological devices now available, like little remote control devices. You could go under the car and give them electronic pulse of some sort that would kill the car. There are what they call spike strips that can be laid out and blow the tires out in the car, and sometimes that stops the car and sometimes the person continues on the wheel. There's also a common practice that takes place, and we see these certainly on the videos from California because they do it quite frequently, and that is called a pit maneuver, where you basically have the police car come up alongside, let's say the right front of the police car, alongside the left rear of the vehicle they're pursuing, or the opposite, and basically strike it, a quick strike, and makes the car spin out of control and hopefully stop. Those are a number of ways that we can terminate these pursuits. Pursuit policies also control the number of vehicles that are involved, who can be involved, what kind of cars are used. Like the New Jersey policy says, a pursuit, it has to be a vehicle that has both a light and a siren, so it's clear to the public what's going on. You can't, like in the movies, you cannot conduct a pursuit in New Jersey in an unmarked vehicle with no lights or sirens. So if you remember some of the pursuits from like Lethal Weapon, where they're chasing people all over town in a guy's wife's station wagon, doesn't happen, or not supposed to happen in the state of New Jersey. So those are just some examples of what the policies include. And certainly, if we don't follow the policies or the policies don't exist, could be, big dollars against the police department in civil liability suits if people do get injured or killed during these pursuits, even the bad guys. So why do we pursue, and how do we justify the actions taken by officers? Well, I mentioned some of these already before we got to this slide. Some of the things that we have to consider. First of all, why are we chasing this person? Is this person, were they speeding and now for some reason they want to run? And we don't know yet what the reason they're running is. Are they wanted? Are they just don't want to stop? So one of the things is, why are we chasing them? Or maybe have we already identified this is a stolen vehicle, this is a wanted suspect? Pursuit policies might tell you that if you don't know anything serious, if it's not a felony or a serious crime, that you have to terminate the pursuit. So that's certainly, and some officers would say, well, wait a minute, he's running. But maybe he's running because he is a murderer. Well, we don't know that, and pursuit policies will make you discontinue if you don't know. They also determine who's in control. New Jersey, the police supervisor, as long as they're not in the pursuit, is in control of the pursuit because they want somebody who is away from the action, somebody who's not, wrapped up in the emotion of the chase, who can judge circumstances and situations based upon reports, based upon what they know is coming up ahead of them, and terminate this pursuit if necessary. So other issues we got to look at, and whether we continue to pursue or not, driving conditions, what's the condition of the officer, how good a driver they are, the vehicle they were driving is very important, and certainly what's the weather like. All those things could impact the control of the police vehicle and even the suspect vehicle. Use of warning devices, like I mentioned, New Jersey requires both lights and sirens during the entire time of the pursuit, so they're never going to turn off the siren during a pursuit. That's required in New Jersey. Excessive speed. How fast are they going? Are they going in speeds that somebody could get killed at? There's what we used to call in our training is risk versus need. How bad do we need to stop this person right now versus how many people could possibly get hurt if we continue it? Are we using due regard for the citizens while we're conducting this pursuit? Can we use deadly force? Some states and cities have very clear policies that you cannot shoot from or at a moving vehicle. Now, there are some certainly exceptions. If you're standing in front of the vehicle and the person's coming right at you, some states will allow. Of course, what happens if you shoot somebody through the windshield, and it's not going to stop the car? They're going to keep coming at you. So you're probably better off to get out of the way. So many departments are moving towards there's no reason ever that you should shoot somebody from or at a moving vehicle. Department policies and state laws take this into account. Again, New Jersey has a very good policy, very clear, very deliberate policy. Appropriate supervision and training, I already mentioned. Officers have to be trained regularly so they all understand the policy, and each individual pursuit needs to be managed and supervised by somebody who's not right there involved in it. There's also a reporting requirement in a lot of states where after you conduct a pursuit, you have to write up a form that describes what happened, and who was involved and all those kind of things. So, some other issues. Technology. I think we've mentioned this in a lot of other courses, mentioned it before. In this course, technology is growing and growing and growing. Anybody today can go out and order a computer that I'm using to record this presentation is probably better than the computers in any police department in the nation right now, because I just bought it and I jacked it up with, the best processor I could get, the most memory I could get, so on and so forth. So, you may not find that in your local police department. So technologically, police might be behind what the criminals have. We also have certainly the issue of illegal immigration. It's been talked about quite a bit. People coming across the border, possible terrorists come across the border. Terrorist issues, big deal in our society today. Just this morning, before I came to work today, the news reported that there was a beheading at a business in France, and that business happens to have its headquarters right here in Pennsylvania. There was also a number of people, I believe it was like 27 people killed in Tunisia, which is a country in northern Africa, where people go to do their vacations, because it's like a beachfront, Mediterranean kind of thing. And there were British people on the beach, and 27 people were killed. So that's an important thing. We also have challenges, racial profiling. Is it still an issue today? In New Jersey many years ago, there was a big issue with racial profiling, and it was determined that the department policy was actually encouraging officers to stop people because of their ethnicity. That was part of the profile for drug couriers, whether they be Hispanic or black. And I guess if you were a drug courier then and you were white, you could just pass right on through. But that was one of many, many pieces of the profile. But you can't just target a race, and that's what racial profiling is when you target a race and use that as a characteristic and suggest that because they are that race that they're bad. What we did, and your slide suggests need to collect data, what we did in New Jersey, and they're still doing today because of that, what came out of that incident with the state police, is every police department in New Jersey, when they conduct motor vehicle stops, they have to record data about the person who's operating the vehicle. Why did you stop the vehicle? Did you issue them a summons or not? What was their gender? All these things. In my department, we actually had to fill out a form. There was like a log sheet for every motor vehicle stop that you would conduct during the day. That you'd have to give all this data. So collecting that data would allow a state, the courts, federal agencies like the Department of Justice to take a look and see whether it appeared that there was racial profiling going on. So that was an important thing. You can read about that on page 129. Other challenges, certainly if you have some issues with unhappy workers, working conditions, not enough cops, cars in bad shape, We had an issue years ago where the township didn't provide money in the budget to update our cars, so we're driving cars that had 100,000 miles on them, 110,000, and so on and so forth. And our police officers, we went to the township council meeting and we protested, holding signs with the car numbers and how many miles so the citizens could see. So, that's some issue. Maybe if contract talks aren't going well, there might be a work slowdown. Baltimore is an example of a work slowdown. After the Freddie Gray incident and then the charging of 6 officers in his death, officers down there began to feel that being aggressive police officers could be bad for them. That maybe by doing what they felt was doing their jobs, that they wind up getting charged if a person got hurt as a result of the incident. Freddie Gray case, there's a lot going on with that right now. There was just recently the release of the medical examiner's report, which the little bit that I've heard seems to contradict even the charges against the officers. So we're going to see a lot more from that one. But that certainly is a challenge for the leader of the Baltimore Police Department, is how do I maintain safety and security in my town if the officers are backing off and only responding when they are called for service and not really going aggressively after the drug dealers and other violent criminals. They had a whole lot of shootings a few weeks ago, and a really, really bad weekend, and all attributed, at least that's what some people allege, attributed to the fact that the officers weren't going after things. So there's a lot of issues that come out of being a leader in a police department. This document right here is for your enjoyment. It's simply a copy of one department's pursuit policy. You can probably read it. Well, I don't know if you can read it on the slide in your handout. You'd probably be better if you actually wanted to read this, to pause this recording and look at it. But basically, it's just a general policy. It tells you, it's going to be guidelines for making decisions with regard to pursuits, and then it goes on to say, how do you initiate the pursuit, what's the supervisory responsibilities, and this is a snapshot of it because there's obviously it's a lot more involved in this. But like I said, you can look right at the New Jersey Attorney General's guidelines, which I will give you the link to, and if you want to read what the policy is in the state of New Jersey. A lot of detail. Okay, other issues in law enforcement, recruiting people, women and minorities. Women have really started getting into law enforcement since the 70s. Prior to that, there were women involved in police departments, but really as the same role as men has grown quite a bit since the 70s. Police departments have large numbers, especially city departments, large numbers of female officers on the force. If you watch TV news and media, you'll always see female officers in Philadelphia at crime scenes and whatnot. My police department, at the highest number, we had 3 female officers out of like 80 cops. So that's not a huge percentage, but comparatively across the board, it wasn't bad. Some departments have a higher percentage, some have less. But it's a matter of, there are some challenges recruiting females that want to be police officers. I know from now having contacts in New York City, there's a great deal of female officers in the city of New York, and they're all over the country. But there are challenges. There's recruiting. There's the physical testing. And generally, women have less upper body strength than men, so we have to account for that. How much upper body strength is really needed for the job. So we have to make sure that we craft our testing in a way that we can accommodate those female officers that can still do the job. And if you look at the requirements for the city of Philadelphia, which are posted on Philly PD's website, they clearly have a breakdown based upon gender and age as to what the requirements are physically. So that's very interesting. Increasing levels of education. More and more people like yourselves are going to college before they decide to get involved in policing. When I went in the 80s, and it wasn't that big a deal. And there weren't a great deal of people that were going to college to then become police officers. But now it seems to be very common. Philadelphia, just a couple of years ago, changed their requirements so that people have to have an associate's degree before they can get into police academy. So, pretty important. Hopefully, you are all going to be successful in your education. Some of you will go on to bachelor's degrees, especially those who want to be involved in certain federal agencies will go on to bachelor's degrees and other higher end degrees. So, very, very important. In community order and policing and problem solving, as we discussed in the previous slideshow, female officers can be very beneficial or have a vital role in that, as well as regular law enforcement duties, because they can get more involved, especially with the female members of the community or with any members of the community, children, female members, even males. The female might have a different perspective, may have some better rapport with certain members of society, so they can all be very, very important. Recruitment of minority officers, I think I've mentioned this in class before, is very difficult if you're having problems in your community between the police and the minority community. Look at Baltimore as an example. They claim that there's a bad culture there. Other cities, I believe Cleveland has been mentioned before, places where the community, especially minority community and the police, have a bad relationship. How do you recruit people from that minority community if they have a bad feeling or opinion of your police department? Very difficult, and agencies are constantly trying to figure that out, constantly trying to push and figure out the best ways to draw minorities into their police departments. We got to reach out. People have talked about this before. Reach out to the community, make friends in the community, and eventually people will be interested. Philadelphia, their big push, posters all over the place, billboards, reaching out, and it's very important. Of course, recruiting minority officers is also going to be difficult because of an education requirement. Philadelphia requires college now, but what's the percentage of people in the city school system that are able to go on to college? If your school system isn't performing well, it might be difficult to get those officers from within your community. Also, another issue in law enforcement with regard to minorities is a disproportionate amount of minorities in supervisory positions. We need to make sure that everyone's given an opportunity. Now, of course, the questions come to mind is how do we provide that opportunity without being unfair to other qualified candidates? And that's something that is still, a big debate. Do we want to have a quota system as was, done in say the 70s or 80s, where you had to promote so many of a certain race or ethnicity? Or do we want to make it so that we are cultivating within our departments quality people from minorities that we recruited so that they can be better able to succeed and become supervisors? Very difficult to get that job done. But if you look around, again, Philadelphia is a perfect example. The higher echelon in the Philadelphia Police Department, the commissioner, African American, first deputy commissioner, African American. He may possibly become the commissioner if Commissioner Ramsey leaves. So, we're doing pretty well there. Baltimore, same thing, which is an interesting quandary because people talk about the police and the public not getting along well in Baltimore, but Baltimore is a town where the mayor is black, the police commissioner is black, and yet the police department still is having difficulty dealing with the community. So, but there's just examples of minorities who are in high places in these police departments. And if you look around the country, there are many, both minorities and females, who have been able to rise to the ranks of chiefs or commissioners within police departments all over the country. So some future things to think about. Well, Your book addresses a couple. I'd say this is a very short list, but we have the FBI and the Society of Futurists International basically looking at, what's going to go down in the future. Are we going to have a RoboCop in the future? Are we going to have a situation like in the movie Demolition Man, where the police are basically pacifists? What's going to go on in our society down the road? Of course, technology and changes, not only in policing, but in corrections and in our entire society, are going to help to dictate how those things will happen. Right now, I think we're in a time of great potential for change as we relook at the society and people working together, as we look at the use of body cameras and other technologies like drones to help us conduct our jobs. Do we need to have police officers driving around every neighborhood when we could have a drone flying overhead and seeing what's going on? Well, I'd say yes, we need those cops on the street because we need to form relationships, not just have a surveillance culture. But certainly something like a drone could provide us with a great deal of additional eyes on in the community. They also mention here that community-oriented policing and problem solving will need to change. Basically, they're simply talking about, the original structure and how cops was implemented within various police departments. It's just important that we figure out how to give our officers the responsibilities that they need to do and the authority to do the jobs that they need to do to be successful in the various communities. Also, we need to look at how we're going to supervise these people. If we're giving them additional authorities, will we have the same type of hierarchy of command that we have, or will that change as well? Entire police departments may change if our command structure changes due to our community policing efforts. So, in summary, basically this chapter was looking at some of the high-level issues and challenges that police management have. Two of the biggest one being the use of force, which use of force and the ethnic component or minority component, very, very big talk in today's society today, right now. Going from Michael Brown in Ferguson all the way up through, there was the shooting in Frankfurt. I believe this guy's name was Tate. Allegedly he was going for a gun, and now we're hearing that he wasn't actually anywhere near the door going for the gun, but the officer thought he might be going for the gun, and people are questioning officers' use of force and also suggesting that, if he was a white kid, maybe he would have done it. Those are issues that need to be addressed. From me as a police officer with 25 years experience in the field, I don't think I'd care whether the guy was white, brown, yellow, or whatever. If I think he's going for a gun, I need to do something that's going to stop him. If I can lay hands on him and take him down, if he's far enough away from the gun, well, then maybe I can do that. Maybe I don't need to shoot him. But I wasn't at this situation, so I don't know. And certainly the next issue we addressed was pursuit. A lot of people get hurt in police pursuits, mainly because of decisions of the bad guy. But in order to try to lessen these injuries and deaths, communities, police agencies, DA's offices, attorney generals, whatever, have come up with policies to lessen the number of pursuits and maybe terminate them if it got too dangerous so that we don't have the injuries. Unfortunately, that doesn't always work, because there was a pursuit in Morristown a number of years ago in which, and actually I think it was officers from like Delran or somewhere further to the west, were chasing somebody on a road called Creek Road, comes into Morristown and eventually comes into Mount Laurel. Well, they terminated the pursuit. They stopped chasing these guys. They backed off. They turned the lights off, turned the sirens off. But the guy they were chasing kept on going, kept going at a high rate of speed, and went to go through a light at this intersection of Creek Road, and I believe it's called Morristown Centerton Road or Centerton Road, and crashed in and killed somebody. The pursuit was over, but this guy still thought he had to get away. So even a pursuit policy that led to the termination of pursuit because it was dangerous didn't stop him from getting in a crash. Other issues we talked about: minorities in policing, women in policing, issues that come up all the time, the use of technology in policing, what do we have available to us, some of the emerging technologies that are out there. There's many of them, and the ones that are being talked about the most today probably are on body cameras and the use of drones by police agencies. And of course, what's going to come up with that is people's right to privacy. If you got a drone over somebody's house, can we use information that we get from that drone being over somebody's house? We have a lot of road to travel with regard to that. So take a look at your book, go through the chapters. This is the third of 3 chapters for this particular unit on policing. They're relatively short, chapters 3, 4, and 5, but please go through, highlight, take notes. If you want to enhance your understanding of some of the material, I'd suggest that you also take a look at the case studies at the end of each chapter and try to answer the questions. Try to think about, what would I do in this particular situation? That's what the case studies are all about. And then, of course, each chapter has a chapter summary to give you a basic overview of what the chapter was about. And there's questions at the end of the chapter that you really should understand and be able to answer. So hope you're all having a wonderful time so far in the course. I'll see you in class, and we will look at these issues at a higher level. Hopefully have some pursuit videos, maybe some discussion about proper use of force, look at some other policies and such. Don't hesitate to call me if you have any questions or comments. Phone number's on the screen, as well as my email. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.